Hi there. Yes. Hi there. So it's Cesar and Chris here. We are both based in France and it's almost 11 p.m. here right now. Where are you guys? How are you? We'll start in a few seconds.
Hello, everybody.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. So I hope you guys have a nice day, wherever you are. I guess we'll be starting in a minute or two. I think Isa, you're mute.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, good. Perfect. So let's start now. Okay, so welcome to this live webinar on food and migraine. My name is Isabelle O'Carroll. I'm French and a certified nutritionist, an ambitious writer of content, and the founder of the Good Days program, which is a specific program on diet. I have been working with the Migraine Buddy team and food and, I've been working with the Migraine Buddy team for 3 years now. So let me start with some good news. Today's live session is sponsored by the Good Days program. We have prepared a surprise for you that we will share at the end of this webinar. So make sure you don't miss it. So today we'll be together for about 1 hour, I guess, with the questions. And first, Chris will join me to share with you some information of science behind migraine, including the migraine threshold and risk factor sensitivity. I will then present on the food risk factors, how to find out your sensitivities and what tools in Migraine Buddy can help you find them. I will also share with you a good test program recipe that is available in one of the MBA Plus programs. After that, we will be happy to answer all of your questions. So Chris, are you ready to start now?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Isa. So let's start. Let's actually start with the migraine threshold. So for those of you who have not seen the weather and migraine webinar yet, and you can watch it anytime on YouTube, I'm Chris from Migraine Buddy. I hold a Master of Science degree, and I also am an MB Plus content writer and a Good Days coach. I'm going to share a bit of science with you tonight, or today, depending on where you are. It is very important in the food context. It will be pretty similar to what you've seen in previous webinars, so please bear with me for a few minutes if you are familiar with what I'm going to say. So to start with, as of today, the causes of migraine remain widely unknown to scientists. We only know that some sensitive brain receptors trigger migraine symptoms when they get upset. They can stand only a certain level of migraine risk. And they get upset when they're exposed to too much of it. The maximum risk level is called the migraine threshold. So when the migraine threshold is reached, brain receptors get upset and migraine symptoms appear. So let's have a look at this on a graph. I love graphs. I hope you guys are okay with this. So risk level is in vertical, with the migraine threshold in red, and horizontal, time is in horizontal, and risk is in orange. So on this graph, we see how the risk level evolves along the day. It decreases slightly from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., and then it increases from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. And symptoms appear when the risk reaches the migraine threshold, and this happens between 8 and 9 p.m. So let's dig into this risk in orange, and let's start with risk factors. Risk factors are also known as triggers, but they do not trigger anything. We are exposed to multiple risk factors at once. Each risk factor bears a risk, and they all pile up to form our migraine risk level in orange. And when it reaches the migraine threshold, symptoms appear. They can be related to sleep, to stress, to weather, to hunger, to hydration, to hormones, to exertion, to noises and smells, diet, and others. So let's see how it looks like on our graph. Here is an example of piling risk factors. So we have 4 types of risk related to hormones, weather changes, stress, and added sugar. Note that hormones and weather-related risks remain stable from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Stress slightly decreases, and added sugar risk appears at 4 p.m. and quickly increases from there. Note as well that however we pile them up, symptoms appear at the same time. So for instance, here, I sorted them a different way, another way, and there, a third way, but it doesn't change anything in the end. Symptoms will still appear at the same time, sometime between 8 and 9 p.m. So let's come back to this one. In order to remain free of symptoms, we must stay below the threshold. So quick reminder, sensitive brain receptors trigger migraine symptoms when they get upset. And they get upset when the migraine threshold is reached. How do we stay below the threshold then? There are 3 ways. The first way is to avoid risk exposure. For instance, if I avoid added sugar at 4 p.m., I stay below the threshold and I don't have symptoms. The second way is to mitigate risk. For example, if I take some time every day to care for my loved ones, 30 minutes to walk my dog, and a few minutes to meditate, over time, I will build resistance to stress. So I will be less affected by stress. On the graph, less risk from stress, so the green band is thinner, and I will stay below the threshold, no symptoms. The only other way to avoid symptoms is to raise the threshold with preventive medication. In this case, brain receptors get less sensitive to migraine risk and can tolerate more risk. So on the graph, the threshold is higher and I have no symptoms. If you have questions on preventive medication and on medication in general, please talk to your doctor. Let's now talk about risk factor sensitivity. So we have high, medium, or low sensitivity to each risk factor we're exposed to. High sensitivity means that when we're exposed, risk rises sharply and quickly reaches the threshold, and symptoms appear. In this case, we are highly sensitive to tannins. In other words, every time we have tea or coffee or chocolate or red apple, we have symptoms. Now, medium sensitivity. Medium sensitivity means that risk level rises significantly, but the threshold is not reached if we are only exposed to this risk factor. But in case of repeated exposure, risk builds up and may finally reach the threshold. And then symptoms appear. If we have low sensitivity, symptoms will not appear when we're only exposed to this risk factor, and even after multiple exposure. But keep in mind that we are also exposed to other risk factors, multiple risks at once, actually. So if our risk level was already high before we had food with tannins, we may end up with symptoms anyway. Okay, so we know that 1, we are exposed to multiple risk factors at once, and 2, we may have high, medium, or low sensitivity to each. In order to stay below the threshold and avoid symptoms, all possible options span from do nothing to control everything. If do nothing worked, we would not be here today. So I exclude this one. Control everything is quite restrictive and difficult, very difficult to keep with. On top of this, it is overkilling for each low sensitivity. So ideally, we want to avoid exposure to every high sensitivity risk. We want to mitigate exposure to every medium sensitivity risk. And we don't want to bother about low sensitivity risk. But how can we identify these sensitivities? First, the easy way that doesn't work is called soft test. The idea with the soft test is I don't have symptoms, I get exposed to a risk factor on purpose, then if I get symptoms, it means that I am sensitive to this risk factor. And if I don't get symptoms, it means that I'm not sensitive to it. So intuitively, it sounds logical, but let's see why it doesn't work. First, as long as I don't have symptoms, the only thing that I'm sure that I know, the only thing that I'm sure of, the only thing that I know for sure is that my risk level is below the threshold, but I don't know how far below. So let's take two extreme examples. First, very close to the threshold, and two, very far from the threshold before testing. So in the first case, just before testing, my risk level is already very high. And then I have food with tannins. Symptoms will appear, whatever my sensitivity, whether it's low, medium, or high. I will have symptoms anyway. I was so close to the threshold already. Conclusion, well, I cannot conclude. I cannot say whether I have low, medium, or high sensitivity to tannins. Second case, this time I start very far away from the threshold. So, and then I'm there before testing, and then I have food with tannins. I won't get symptoms if I have low or medium sensitivity. And I will get symptoms if I have high sensitivity. So if I don't have symptoms, I cannot say whether I have low or medium sensitivity. But I know for sure that I am not highly sensitive to tannins. So this is the only thing that I know for sure. So it's better than do nothing, but it's not very helpful in the end. So we won't keep that solution either. The working solution here is what we call test. Keep risk as low as possible. So in this example, I mitigate my sleep disruption, I mitigate stress, and I make sure it is not this time of the month for hormones, and that the weather is fair before testing. And then I test tannins. If symptoms appear, it means that if symptoms appear after short exposure, it means that I have high sensitivity. If symptoms appear after repeated exposure, it means that I have medium sensitivity. And if symptoms do not appear after repeated exposure, it means that I have low sensitivity. So this is very important. This is actually the most important slides. So when testing, if I have symptoms quickly, high exposure. If I have symptoms after repeating the test and not before, if it takes a long time, then it's medium exposure. And if I don't get symptoms after several days of testing, then low exposure. Not low exposure, sorry, low sensitivity. So eliminate every risk factor that you've tested highly sensitive to. Mitigate every risk factor that you've tested medium sensitive to, and do not bother about risk factors that you've tested low sensitive to. All right, I hope you guys are still awake. Now, Isa, let's go for the fun part.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you. So let me share my screen. Okay. And start on food talk now. So food risk factors and the science behind it. So according to the migraine community, here are the 10 most frequent migraine risk factors. And among those, weather changes and hormones are nearly impossible to control. The remaining 8 are all food and lifestyle risk factors that can be worked on to mitigate the risk of reaching your migraine threshold. So stress and anxiety, sleep disruption, and neck pain are all controllable lifestyle risk factors. It takes time, but by implementing some habits in your daily life, you can take control over them. The other 5 are food and drink related: dehydration, skip meals, alcohol, caffeine, and processed food. Over the last 40 years, research papers on food and migraine have shown that we tend to be sensitive to chemicals contained in food rather than food ingredients. Combining the information from those papers, we pulled out 21 chemicals that are migraine risk factors. So some are chemicals that are added to the food, like for example, in the list known, let's say free glutamate, mainly found in MSG and any fermented food. Also nitrates found in cold cuts, or sulfates in dried foods and wine. Other are chemicals that are a component of the food. So to name a few: capsaicin, which is a hot part of the chili and cayenne pepper; glycoalkaloids found in nightshades and apples; histamine, mainly found in fish, seafood, ground meat, and leftovers; and also salicylate, found in many green vegetables and melons. So note that some foods contain several of those chemicals. For example, a banana contains some histamine and tyramine. So we may think that because we follow a healthy diet, we naturally avoid all food risk factors. This way, we tend to overlook some food chemicals found in the so-called healthy food. For example, salicylates can be found in lots of green vegetables like broccoli, cucumber, and zucchini. Pineapple is a healthy diet favorite that might dramatically raise your risk of having symptoms. Another example is the tomato, with up to 6 chemical risk factors on its own. This shows that healthy food for weight control might not be applicable to migraine. So you may wonder why it is important to identify your food sensitivities. So it's important to identify them to naturally mitigate the risk and control your migraine. Remember what Chris said about the 3 ways to get control over your migraines: avoid risk, mitigate risk, and raise the threshold. So you need to know your sensitivities to avoid or mitigate your food-related risk. So let's see how to get control means then. If you are highly sensitive to a risk factor, then avoid any food that contains these risk factors. If you identify medium sensitivity to a risk factor, then you can control your intake to stay below the threshold. If you identify low sensitivity, then you know you can have as much as you want of this food. So once you know your sensitivities, you can get control. So how to identify your food risk factor sensitivities? So again, as per Chris' demonstration, you know that the best way to find sensitivities is to test. So first, you need to control everything that you can control. Lifestyle protectors to control lifestyle-related risk, and specific diet to control food risk. Then, and only then, because all of your risk factors will be at the lowest level possible, you can start testing food risk factors one by one and evaluate your sensitivity to each of them. So let's now have a look at the available programs to control everything controllable. So let's say the first group of programs is any kind of weight loss programs. Those are great if you want to lose weight, but are not applicable to control migraine food and lifestyle risk factors. As we mentioned before, healthy food can be at risk for migraine sufferers. Migraine doctors migraine doctors programs usually cover half of the risk factors we've discussed today. So if you happen to be sensitive to what they cover and not sensitive to what they do not cover, then they are great for you. But if you want to cover every risk factor we've discussed today, then I would recommend that you try MD Plus programs. So Migraine-Buddy has developed some simple programs with lots of information on both food and lifestyle migraine risk factors. Some will help you recognize the food you should eat with associated recipes and the one you should avoid. But they will also give you tips on how to manage some chemicals just by preparing, cooking, storing your food a certain way. Let's have a look at the quinoa meatballs recipe found in the 10 tips and 5 recipes for a migraine-friendly diet program. Here you can see the layout of the recipe with the ingredients and the step-by-step preparation. In this recipe, we use fresh ground pork and as ground meat. We use fresh ground pork as ground meat develops histamine very quickly. So the fresher you have it, the better. I recommend that you either get the meat from your butcher, making sure he grinds it in front of you. Or you can also get some frozen ground meat that you defrost in the fridge and use as soon as it is defrosted. You can also find in this recipe some shallots that are a good replacement for onions, as it doesn't contain any of the onion's allergens. The herbs are used fresh, as dried products contain sulfates. So each recipe in the programs will give the exact way to use the product and avoid having any migraine risk factor. Those programs will raise your awareness on the food and lifestyle risk factors, and with small steps at a time will help you control all controllable risk factors so that you can get control over time. However, if you prefer a fully dedicated program with a professional coach to get control over your migraines, the Good Days program is for you. It covers all food-related risk factors and even more: stress, sleep, hydration, hunger, neck pain, exertion, and bruxism. Within only 30 days, you will know for sure whether food makes a difference for them. And from then, you'll start testing. If you think you're ready for this journey and feel like getting my daily tips on French and Asian cuisine, go to the gooddaysprogram.com website and let's get started. Okay, thank you very much. And I would like to make a quick announcement before answering your questions. So please share with us your feedback for this webinar via the link in the description box of the video. You can also check the pinned comment for quicker access to the links. Once you've submitted your feedback, you will be able to download a PDF of the quinoa meatballs recipe. And you will also get a $20 discount code for the MBA Plus annual plan. As promised, at the beginning of the webinar, we have a special present. For everyone who purchases the MBA Plus annual plan with our discount code, our sponsor Good Days program offers its do-it-yourself guide worth $49. You will find there everything you need to know about food and migraine, a step-by-step description on how to follow the program, a shopping list, a list of food with associated chemicals, tips, recipes, 6 lifestyle habits that will help you stay under your threshold, and much more. In short, your do-it-yourself toolbox to get control. If you are already an MBA Plus subscriber, firstly, thank you for the support. And secondly, you will soon be able to access the same content in the new MBA Plus program. So don't worry. So let's now answer some of your questions. I suppose you've got plenty of them. So feel free to share them with us. Oh, yeah. Many questions are coming in. Okay, Christophe, I can see a question for you here. Okay, Christophe.
Yes, sorry, I was on mute.
Okay, good.
So tell me about the question.
Alors, what does repeated exposure mean to?
Oh, determine medium sensitivity. Yes, I can see. Multiple glasses of wine at once, a glass of wine per day over a few days. So, well, yeah, I think we kind of went through this, and Isa, maybe you did. But anyway, so the idea here is when you test. So first, before testing, you need to make sure that you control everything that you can control. So it's about diet, but it's also about any kind of lifestyle risk factors that you may be exposed to. And when you have done that, and only when you have done that, and it can take some time if you are if you suffer from chronic migraine, for instance, it can take like a few weeks to get this kind of habits up and running. So once you have done that, you can start testing. And when you test, the way you test is so you were talking, Kala, you were talking about glasses of wine. So let's imagine that you're testing the tannins in the wine, because there are tannins in the wine. Actually, I would recommend you don't start with wine, because wine is also alcohol and many other things. But let's assume that it's only tannins in the wine. So in red wine, you would go for tannins containing food several times a day for several days. So you may have a glass of wine at night, you may have a cup of coffee in the morning, and you may have a cup of tea in the afternoon, and red berries at lunch, and that for several days. And if after several days, so if you get quickly symptoms, that you are probably highly sensitive. If you get symptoms after repeated exposure, so like 3-4 days, you're probably medium sensitive. And if you don't get symptoms at all after a week of repeated exposure, that you surely have low sensitivity to tannins. So it does take a bit of time to read, well, before the questions are getting to us. So just let me know if I answered your question, and don't hesitate to ask more. So I'm going to mute now.
Okay. So we're waiting for. Well, Laura says that she was very lucky with paleo, managed trigger food. So that's good. I mean, if you have eliminated the food triggers you had with this diet, then it's great. Yeah, it's definitely great, you know. Sometimes, I mean, some people are just sensitive to, for example, sugar. So in this diet, they eliminate everything sugary, and then by this way and by this means, they reduce their migraine, because they completely get rid of their trigger. Any other questions there?
Yeah, I see a question of Daniel for you, Isa.
Okay.
Let me read it. During the time you're testing for one thing, you're eating many other things. How do you know it's the thing you're tasting that pushed you above the threshold?
So actually, when you eat, it's why we say that you have to avoid and limit everything that can be risk factors before you start testing. If you keep everything low from the food you have, and everything low, as low as possible, regarding also the different risk factors you can control, then when you start testing, you start testing one chemical by one chemical. And this way, you can understand if you are sensitive to this chemical or not, depending on the reaction you have. If you don't touch anything else, if everything is kept as low as possible, and then you try only one thing, one chemical, then you can see how your body reacts to this chemical. And here you can make deductions. I hope it answers your question, Daniel. And you always introduce only one thing at a time.
So another question from Sandy. I also have BMS, so I'm extremely sensitive to many things. In my case, would it be advisable to keep diet bland for several days, then add each food daily or every other day?
I mean, in the program, when you are sensitive to many different things, the best way we recommend is to try to get rid of all chemicals and everything that is a risk factor before you start testing anything. So it can take some time. When you're highly sensitive, it can take some time. But by doing this effort for a few weeks of having everything controlled and try to control also stress and all the other things, and get rid of everything that can be a risk factor for you, then you can start testing again. And when testing, you'll see if you have a strong reaction straight away. So you start by testing, like, for example, only on one meal a day. And then after 2 days, if you still feel good, you can test again the same thing for two meals a day and get more and more and see if you start a reaction. This is a long process. It takes time, but at least you know exactly what you are sensitive to at the end. And instead of having to get rid of everything forever, you do it just for a while, you reintroduce, and when you reintroduce the food and you see that you have no reaction, you can keep it in your diet. And from there, you start reintroducing something else. And you do that step by step, chemicals by chemicals, until you understand the ones you are sensitive to.
Okay, so a question from Prima. What would be an immediate reaction versus medium time-wise? Is it 2 hours versus 24 hours versus a couple of days?
It depends. It depends of each of you. It depends how sensitive you are to these chemicals. So it can take up to 5 days for risk factors to start a migraine or to become very important for the migraine. So up to 5 days, depending on how sensitive you are and depending on how much you took some. So what we recommend is, like, when you start testing, if you start with a big amount of it, you will know faster if you are sensitive to the chemical. Because first you want to know if you're sensitive. Then in a second phase, you can try by making tests, small tests, to see how high you are sensitive to it.
So to add, so to add to this, I think if you are highly sensitive, if you are highly sensitive, you will reach the threshold very quick. and it's a matter of hours, as you mentioned. For instance, we have a number of users report that being very sensitive to odd smells, they would have symptoms in a question of minutes, and even sometimes is even more brutal than this. It's a question of seconds. So high sensitivity means that the reaction will be stiff and come fast. If it takes a few days, most probably it's medium sensitivity, and you need to be exposed one time and another time, so that as we saw on the graph before, the risk builds up.
Yeah, thank you, Christophe. So we have to answer the question from DP about vegetarian food. So indeed, in the program, in the Good Days program, but also in the MB Plus programs, you have some vegetarian options. Like each time, even if you have some animal protein, you can always replace them by chickpeas or lentils or quinoa. Protein like that. So there's always a trick to make it vegetarian. Yeah. On top of the regular vegetarian food we have, we use a lot of eggs also in the recipes, and so I don't know if you eat some, but there's always a vegetarian option. Yeah, indeed. Meat is not compulsory. Thank you, Lippi.
Okay, more questions maybe?
Oh, I think Christophe, it's for you, this one, Chris. Question from Andrea.
Or how do foods that are non-inflammatories affect migraines? So there is not one answer. I'm afraid that you need to test for yourself. Meaning, once again, the sensitivities are proper to every one of us. And whether they are food sensitivities or whether they are lifestyle sensitivities, one of you mentioned hormones, stress, and weather. So some of them are controllable, like stress. Others are very, very hard to control, like hormones and weather. So about food, fortunately, in many cases, we can control what we eat. So the foods you have in mind need to be tested, but don't test them separately. You really need to make sure that you work on everything at once, meaning you keep all your lifestyle stresses as low as possible, or as you take time to control them, to mitigate the risk you can have from them. And then once you've done that, and once you've eliminated for a few days all the usual suspects of diet, then you can start testing, but only then.
Thank you, Chris. I will answer Sandy's questions. What would be considered a good base diet before you start adding possible trigger food? In the Good Days program, you get the full program and the full process. And in this process, we share with you a shopping list that contains all the food that you can have. There's also a list of food with all the chemicals in it. So like that, you can exactly know what chemicals you're having. And we share some meal plans. We share a few recipes. And we give you always options to combine food. So different options of vegetables or protein and things like that. You can combine them the way you want, and depending on your taste. So it's all in the Good Days, all in the Good Days program.
I guess another question from Prima for you.
Yeah.
What are the commonly known safe food that are normally not triggers?
So that are normally not triggers, common food, you will have, for example, in the vegetables, you will have some carrots, some cauliflower, leeks, turnips. That's quite a lot in terms of fruit and vegetables. And you also have any kind of meat is okay, as long as it's fresh. You've got, so that's for the protein, but you also get the protein, as I said earlier, in the legumes. So there's a list of legumes. There is a list shared in the Good Days program by topic, like by vegetable, fruits, protein, and that's a big list like that. You can make your own choices. What is Good Days? Good Days is a Good Days program. It's a food and lifestyle program that is dedicated to migraine sufferers. So we've worked on it, based on our experience at Migraine Buddy, and we have decided to help migraine sufferers with easy things like they can do themselves and that they can implement in their daily life. So things they can control. And the program is all about the things you can control and how to control them. So that's a Good Days program.
So a question from CTF. I purchased MB Plus when it was launched. Will I get access to this as well? Answer is yes. Maybe not today, but surely in the coming days. And if you believe it lasts a bit too much, don't hesitate to drop an email to Jenny at healing.com, and she will be happy to accelerate this process.
Yeah, it should be shortly in the MB Plus program. De rien. So hope you enjoyed the webinar and that you've learned some things about food and migraine. Don't hesitate to visit the gooddaysprogram.com website to learn more about all of this. Check out the programs that are in MB Plus and in Migraine Buddy in the Discover section. You have some programs, some are free and some come with MB Plus. So up to you to try them all. So the Good Days program is on the website on gooddaysprogram.com, but also especially for this webinar, the special offer is like if you buy MB Plus, you will get with it the Good Days program guide with everything you need to know to follow this program. So it's quite a good deal because it's associated with all the MB Plus features that you can find in Migraine Buddy. Special offer, yeah. If you get MB Plus with the coupon code that you will receive once you will have given your feedback on the type form, on the form. And the form link is is in the comments here at the very top. So we might put it again here just now. Check. Yeah.
So do you guys have more questions?
Feedback form. Okay.
Thanks very much, DP.
glad it was helpful for you. So guys, thank you very much for your time tonight and for being with us. So don't forget to fill in the feedback form via the link in the description box. Then you will receive the PDF of the recipe that we shared today and the meatballs recipe and the discount code for the yearly subscription to MB+. So as I just said, with this coupon, you will also get the Good Days program do-it-yourself guide for free. Okay, so thank you very much for joining, and I wish you all a very good evening.
Thank you.
Bye for now.